Is MSG making you crave more? Tonight, we're going to go into discussion about MSG, umami, flavor additives, flavor science, hot sauce, spicy snacks, capsaicin, and the fascinating science behind food craveability. Episode 194 starts now. What's going on, Swear Nation? So glad to have everyone here. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and or Apple Podcast, thank you so much for being here and continuing to make this podcast what it is. I'm your host, Brandon Swear, and tonight we're going to be digging into something that has been sitting right at the intersection of science, the grocery store shelves, food manufacturing, and the bottles of heat that I know a lot of you love. So we're going to be talking about the food science, the flavor enhancement, the MSG, the additives, and craveability tonight. And most importantly, we're going to be asking that question that's more complicated than just simply deciding whether an ingredient is inherently good or it's bad. So food science has dramatically changed over the last 100 years. We've learned things like how to preserve food longer, make products more consistent, extract and concentrate flavors, manipulate textures, and enhance the sensory experience. Some of those developments have been incredibly useful, while others have created some pretty interesting questions. So why do certain ingredients make food taste so much better? And why can you eat one chip and suddenly realize that you've eaten half the bag? Why does a particular hot sauce make you want to take another bite after you've already had enough? And where does MSG fit into all of this? What about yeast extracts or hydrolyzed proteins, natural flavors, artificial flavors, sweeteners, flavor enhancers, and then we get into the world of spice and we start adding capsaicin into the equation. Now you've got flavor, salt, acid, sometimes sugar, and sometimes fat. That's a whole collection of sensory signals hitting your brain all at the same time. So today, I want to explore where MSG came from, what it actually does, and why the food industry uses it. What does science say about its safety? And what legitimate concerns actually exist? And how this shows up in hot sauce and in spicy snacks. Then we're going to take a step back. And at what point does making food taste better become engineering food to make us want more of it? And is that actually a problem? Is it simply good food science, or does it depend on the ingredients? What about the amount of that? Is it the product that it's going into, or maybe the intent behind it all? I want to be very clear here. I'm not coming into this episode saying that MSG is bad out the gate, and I'm not saying that additives are bad out the gate. But I'm definitely not saying that everything natural is automatically good, while everything scientific sounding is automatically bad. That's just not how chemistry works, and that's not how food works, and that's not how the human body works. Instead, I want to understand what actually is happening. And then I want to hear what you think about this, because this is one of those topics where science, the food industry, and our relationship with food, they all collide. So let's go ahead and get on into it. All right, well, the rise of flavor science and umami. Let's start with one of the most misunderstood ingredients in food. That's MSG, or monosodium glutamate. You may have heard that it's dangerous, it's addictive, it causes headaches, or it's basically poison. You may have also heard the complete opposite, that it's completely harmless, and all of the concerns are just simply misinformation. The reality is much more nuanced than that. MSG is the sodium salt of glutamic acid. Glutamic acid is an amino acid, And a glutamate occurs naturally in many foods: tomatoes, Parmesan cheese, mushrooms, meat, seaweed, fermented fruits. So let's look at a simple explanation. Glutamate is something your body already encounters naturally. So MSG is essentially a purified form of glutamate combined with sodium. And that's the point, because the word chemical can make people think that something is automatically artificial. But everything's chemistry. Water's chemistry, salt is chemistry, vitamin C and capsaicin, yep, that's still chemistry. The question is, what chemical is it? How much of it are you consuming? And what does it actually do? So let's talk about the discovery of umami. We're going to go back a little bit more than a century. In 1908, a Japanese chemist named Kikonai Ikeda was studying some kombu seaweed. Kombu is a type of edible kelp that is commonly used to make dashi broth. Ikeda noticed that dashi didn't simply taste salty, sweet, sour, or bitter. There was another sensation happening, something that was savory, something deep, something that made the broth taste, well, delicious. He eventually identified glutamate as the major contributor to the sensation, and he called that taste umami. The word is often translated roughly as pleasant, savory taste or deliciousness. Eventually, umami became recognized as the fifth basic taste, alongside things like sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. And today, we know it plays a major role in how we overall perceive food. So let's talk about how MSG actually works. What happens when you eat MSG? MSG simply dissolves, and glutamate interacts with the receptors involved in the umami taste. One important receptor system is the T1R1 or T1R3 receptor complex. You don't really need to remember that name. There's a simpler version of way to think about this. Your tongue has tons of receptors designed to recognize all kinds of different signals. Umami receptors respond to the glutamate and related compounds. Your brain interprets the signal as savory, rich, brothy, meaty, deeply satisfying. And that's why MSG can make soup taste richer or seasonings taste fuller. Imagine 2 bowls of tomato soup. One contains tomatoes, water, and salt. The second one, identical, but they put a small amount of MSG. You probably wouldn't say, wow, this thing tastes like MSG. Instead, the tomato flavor might seem fuller. The broth might be more rounded, and the savory characteristics much more noticeable. That is flavor enhancement. So where does umami fit into the modern food science of things? MSG wasn't just simply the end of a story. Food scientists have discovered that there are other compounds that influence our perception of flavor. There are 2 examples of disodium inosinate and disodium guanylate. These are nucleotides, and when combined with glutamate, they can create a synergetic effect on the overall umami perception. A simple explanation here is, think of it like turning up an amplifier. Glutamate provides one signal, while these compounds can strengthen the perception of the savory effect. Then you have yeast extracts, hydrolyzed vegetable proteins, and other ingredients that contribute to the glutamate peptides aroma, mouthfeel, and savory complex. And then there's curcumi. Curcumi isn't generally considered another basic taste like sweet or umami. It's much more about the sensation of fullness, continuity, thickness, and richness. Think about the broth that has been simmering for hours. It doesn't simply taste salty. It can feel deeper, longer, more complete. That's part of the sensory experience food scientists have really been trying to understand. So the goal isn't always craving, and I want to make a very important distinction here. It's easy to say that food companies use MSG to make you addicted, but that's an oversimplification here. MSG is primarily a flavor enhancer. It doesn't make something addictive. You shouldn't confuse palatability for addiction. Those are two different things. What food science can do is make food more appealing, more flavorful, more consistent, and more enjoyable. And when you combine that with, say, salt, fat, sugar, texture, aroma, and portion size, you can create an extremely appealing piece of food. And that's where the larger conversation about craveability becomes interesting. It's not necessarily just one magical ingredient, it's an entire formulation. So why have these ingredients become so common, and why are they everywhere? Because food manufacturing has ultimately a very difficult job here. Imagine that you're making the exact same hot sauce and shipping it all across the country. Now, you go ahead and put that on the shelf for 6 months. Then imagine that a consumer is opening that bottle and expecting to taste the exact same bottle they had purchased 6 months earlier. That right there is consistency, and consistency is often difficult. Think about how often fresh ingredients change. You have peppers that vary, tomatoes vary, garlic, fermentation, harvesting conditions, storage, the way that it's stored is obviously playing into effect. Even down to the water that you use can affect the overall formulation. Food science gives manufacturers tools to control the overall total variability. And that is not inherently sinister. That's one reason we can buy food that is safe, stable, and consistent. So I know what you're thinking. What about the business side? Now, for those that are consumers, we're going to talk about the business side of things, because there's also the economic side of this all. Companies have to manufacture products at prices that consumers are willing to pay. They have to transport them and store them. They have to keep them stable, and consumers have to actually enjoy them. If a company can take a less expensive base ingredient and use food science to come alongside and make it taste better, that's economic value. If they can maintain the flavor during processing, that's valuable. If they can reduce the sodium while maintaining the savory flavor, that is extremely valuable. And if they can make a product taste consistent from batch to batch, that is extremely valuable. So when you see MSG on the label, it isn't automatically there because the company is inherently trying to trick you. Sometimes it's there because it simply works. So let's discuss the pros and cons. Let's actually weigh out some of the benefits and the concerns here, because the conversation doesn't work if we only tell one side. MSG provides legitimate umami flavor. It can make foods more savory, and because MSG contains less sodium by weight than table salt, replacing some sodium chloride with MSG can sometimes reduce the total sodium while maintaining the overall flavor. There's also the situation where enhancing flavor may help people who have difficulty finding food appealing. For example, older adults experiencing changes in their overall taste perception may find stronger flavored foods much more appealing. And that doesn't mean that MSG is some kind of nutritional miracle here. It's another tool that influences the overall flavor and palatability. And then we have the safety of this all. Major food safety authorities, even including the US FDA, consider MSG safe at typical usage levels. So because of that, the FDA classifies added MSG as generally recognized as safe. So what about the old MSG controversy here? Let's go ahead and address that elephant that's in the room. You may have heard or thought or looked up and seen, what does MSG play into effect? And you may have seen a term pop up called Chinese restaurant syndrome. For decades, MSG was blamed for, say, headaches, flushing, sweating, and other symptoms. But controlled studies have not supported the idea that typical amounts of MSG in foods reliably cause more symptoms in the general population. That doesn't mean that nobody ever experiences symptoms after eating food containing MSG. Individual sensitivities and reactions do happen and can happen. That's different than saying that MSG universally causes these symptoms. Some studies have also found that relatively large doses consumed without food may cause temporary symptoms in some people. And once again, think about it. Dose matters. The context here matters. Individual response matters. So let's talk about when safe doesn't necessarily mean healthy. Something can be safe and still not necessarily be something you want to consume consistently. Water is necessary. Too much water can be dangerous. Salt is necessary. Too much sodium can cause a problem. Vitamin A is necessary, but too much can be toxic. The question isn't always, is this ingredient safe? Sometimes the better question is, what role does this ingredient play in the overall food? And that's where we get into the ultra-processed foods. Imagine a snack engineered for the perfect crunch, the perfect salt level, the perfect fat content, a strong aroma, or sweetness, or a savory umami, and a flavor that hits quickly and disappears quickly, making you want another bite. Again, this isn't necessarily addiction, but it can be incredibly palatable. And if the food is calorically dense, easy to eat quickly, and easy to consume in large quantities, the overall dietary pattern becomes much, much more important here. So I know what you're thinking. What's the difference between natural and, say, artificial? So I want to go ahead and tackle one of the biggest frustrations when people are talking about food ingredients. The assumption that natural equals good and artificial equals bad. That isn't scientifically accurate. Capsaicin occurs naturally in chili peppers, and capsaicin can cause intense psychological responses. Think about it like your pain receptors activating, heat sensation, sweating, GI symptoms in some people, and a whole cascade of sensory and psychological responses. Natural doesn't automatically mean harmless. On the other side, a compound produced or purified through industrial processing isn't automatically dangerous. So instead of asking, is this natural? Ask, what is it? How much is present? How is it being used? And what does the evidence show here? And what role does it play in the overall product that I'm consuming? That is a much better conversation here. So let's go ahead and bring all this together into the spicy side of the world. Because everything we've talked about comes directly into hot sauce and spicy products. Think about a traditional hot sauce. Maybe it's peppers, vinegar, salt, garlic, and, well, thyme. Maybe it's fermented. Maybe it's aged. Maybe it's cooked. And those ingredients can create incredible complexity. Fermentation can create acids, aromas, savory compounds, and other flavor molecules. Roasting can create, say, some new aromas. Caramelization and Maillard reactions can create complete different flavor experiences here. What is the Maillard reaction? Here, for anyone that might not be familiar, is whenever you're, say, browning some onions, or toasting spices, or searing meat, or even roasting peppers, you're creating new flavor compounds through chemical reactions. That's food science too. You don't need a laboratory coat. Your kitchen is a chemistry lab. Your grill is a chemistry lab. Your fermentation jar is a chemistry lab, and your bottle of hot sauce is the final product of a whole bunch of chemistry. So let's talk about MSG in hot sauce. There are hot sauce companies that use MSG. There are companies that don't. There are companies that proudly advertise that they don't use MSG, and there's companies that simply don't even make it a part of their overall marketing. I don't think that any of those approaches automatically make a company better than another. If a sauce maker uses MSG to increase, say, savory depth, that's a legitimate formula choice. If another wants the flavor to come entirely from the peppers, vinegar, fruit, spices, and fermentation, I think that's also legitimate. The question I care about, does it taste good? Does it serve the product? Is the ingredient properly disclosed? And is the product represented honestly? So let's take a look here at an example. Let's say Company A makes a fermented ghost pepper sauce. They use peppers, vinegar, garlic, salt, and a small amount of MSG. The goal is to give the sauce a more savory depth. They clearly list it on the ingredient label. In that case, I don't have a problem with it. Now, you have Company B. They market the sauce around the claim that nothing but peppers, vinegar, garlic, and salt. But they use flavor enhancers that contradict marketing. Now we have a whole different conversation here. The issue isn't necessarily the ingredient, it's transparency. Now let's talk spicy snacks, because they're ultimately a total different animal. Taking hot sauce out of the equation, hot chips, cheese snacks, crackers, popcorn, meat sticks, seasoning blends, instant noodles, snack mixes, these products can combine an entire collection of sensory signals. Salt, fat, sugar, acids, umami, aroma, crunch, texture, and then capsaicin. That's a completely different sensory experience than, say, just eating a fresh jalapeno. The pepper isn't necessarily driving the entire experience. The product has been designed as a complete sensory package. And the food science is clearly at work here. Now let's connect this back to something we've discussed before, capsaicin. Remember, capsaicin doesn't activate a traditional taste receptor, it activates the TRPV1 receptor. These receptors are involved in detecting heat and potential damaging temperatures. And that's why your brain interprets capsaicin as burning heat, even though your mouth isn't literally being burned by the pepper. It's your nervous system responding. And that's where things get interesting. Capsaicin can trigger pain and heat signaling, which can lead to the release of endogenous opioids and other molecules involved in the pain modulation. That's part of why some people describe a pleasurable sensation after intense spicy food. But let me put an important correction to a common internet claim. It's often too simplistic to say spicy food gives you a dopamine dump. The brain doesn't work like a bucket where you can throw in capsaicin and suddenly dopamine is flooding everything. Dopamine is heavily involved in motivation, learning, reinforcement, and anticipation. Endorphins and endogenous opioid systems are involved in the pain modulation. The overall spicy experience involves sensory processing, automatic responses. It involves emotion, expectation, and reward. So yes, there is a fascinating connection between spicy food and reward, but let's not oversimplify the neuroscience. So what is the perfect storm of flavor? Let's imagine combining all of this together. You've got a spicy snack. Capsaicin activates your heat and pain sensing system. The seasoning contains MSG or other umami compounds. The snack contains salt, maybe some sugar, maybe some fat, maybe some acid. You've got the crunch. You have an amazing aroma, beautiful texture, and you're simply anticipation of this all. And maybe you've eaten this food before, so your brain already knows what experience is coming for it. That's an incredibly sophisticated sensory package. I don't think that automatically means the manufacturer is doing something evil, but I do think it's fascinating. We're no longer simply making food taste good. We're understanding human sensory biology and using the knowledge to design a particular eating experience. So, are food companies tricking us? This is where I want to start to challenge the language. Think about it. Are food companies tricking us? Sometimes, maybe, but not always. If a chef understands that browning garlic creates better flavor, are they tricking you? No. If a sauce maker ferments peppers because the fermentation creates that complexity, are they manipulating you? Technically, they're manipulating the food. But if you think about it, that's what cooking is. You're constantly manipulating ingredients. The question starts to become, where is this line? When does optimization become exploitation? And when does palatability become engineered overeating? When does convenience become nutritional compromise? And when does food science become something that we should be concerned about? I don't think there's just one universal answer to those. So what's my personal take? Where do I personally land on this? Ultimately, I land somewhere in the middle. I'm not completely anti-MSG, and I'm not anti-food science. I'm not anti-additive, and I'm not certainly going to tell you that there is something bad simply because I just can't pronounce the name. That would just be intellectually lazy. But what I am interested in is intentionality and transparency. If a hot sauce maker uses MSG to create a specific flavor profile, tell me. If it works, great. If a snack company develops a seasoning blend that makes a product incredibly craveable, that's food science. But a consumer should understand what they're about to be buying. And I think that we should be willing to ask whether a product was designed primarily to nourish us or to provide us an enjoyable experience, or to provide us simply convenience, or simply to get us to buy another bag. Sometimes it can be all four, and that's where things start to get complicated. So this is where you come in. Now I have a question to turn over to you. Do flavor enhancers belong in hot sauce? Do you care if your favorite sauce contains MSG? Would you rather have a sauce using food science to create the best possible flavor, or would you rather have a shorter ingredient list? Does a clean label actually mean something to you? Or do you care about natural ingredients? Do you care whether an ingredient was fermented, extracted, isolated, or synthesized? And here's another question. If a sauce tastes incredible, is affordable, and has an transparent ingredient label, and is safe, does it matter whether the flavor came from traditional methods or modern food science? Does craftsmanship matter more than chemistry? I genuinely want to know what your thoughts are, because I know the spicy community probably has some of the strongest opinions on this, and I want to hear it. So just go ahead and tell me why. So what should we actually be looking for? If you're standing in the grocery store or looking for a hot sauce online, what should you actually do first? You should read the ingredient label. Not because every unfamiliar ingredient is dangerous, but because you should know what you're buying. Second, look at the nutritional facts. Pay attention to the sodium, added sugar, calories, and serving size. And here's one of the biggest things people overlook: serving size. A sauce may list 1 teaspoon as that serving size, but who is actually putting 1 teaspoon of hot sauce on their food? Maybe a few people, but if you're using 3 tablespoons, you're consuming 3 times the listed serving. That doesn't automatically make the product bad. It means you should understand the numbers. Third, Look at the entire product. Don't get distracted by one ingredient. A sauce containing MSG isn't automatically unhealthy. A sauce without MSG isn't automatically healthy. Natural doesn't automatically mean nutritious. A long ingredient list does not automatically mean dangerous. Look at the whole picture. The bigger question here, and maybe that's the real lesson for today's episode, we've become incredibly good at manipulating food. We can make something sweeter, saltier, spicier, crunchier, creamier, more aromatic, more savory, more shelf-stable, more consistent, and yes, more craveable. The technology itself isn't necessarily the enemy, but technology gives us power. And whenever we have power, we also have more responsibility. For manufacturers, that means transparency. For regulators, continuing to evaluate the evidence. And for consumers, learning enough to make informed decisions. And for people like me who talk about this stuff online, being careful not to turn complicated science into clickbait, that's something I want to continue to work on here. Because I'd rather tell you I don't know yet than to confidently tell you something that isn't true. MSG isn't the villain. Food science isn't the villain. Capsaicin, still not the villain. And natural ingredients aren't automatically heroes. They're tools. And like every tool, how they're used ultimately matters. A hammer can build a house, but it can also break a window. The hammer isn't inherently good or bad. The application of the hammer matters. Same way that food science is similar. It can help preserve food, improve flavor, reduce sodium, improve consistency, and create new products. It can even make nutritious foods more appealing to the broader audience. And it can be used to create products that are extraordinarily easy to overconsume. Both things can be true. That's the nuance I wanted to bring to this conversation. Ultimately, I think that the best thing we can do as consumers is to become more curious. Read the labels, ask the questions, understand what ingredients actually do. Don't fear something simply because it has a complicated name. And don't assume something is healthy simply because the front of the package says natural. If this episode has made you think, or maybe made you look at your favorite hot sauce just a little bit differently, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment wherever you are watching or listening. Tell me what you think about MSG. Tell me what you think about flavor enhancers. And tell me whether you prefer a simple ingredients list or whether you don't really care as long as the product tastes incredible and the ingredients are safe. And if you have a product that would make this conversation even more interesting, go ahead and send it my way. I'd love to continue exploring this. If you are enjoying the Swear Word Podcast, go ahead and take a second, give a rating and review for the podcast on whatever platform that you are on that allows for that podcast rating and review. That rating and review genuinely helps more people discover the overall podcast. So whether you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. For those interactions help tell the platform, hey, people are actually interested in this kind of conversation. And that's how we get this conversation in front of more people. I want to take a second here to mention that we have current sponsorship opportunities available for brands that align with the swear word. Whether that's spicy food, hot sauce, peppers, gardening, food science, health, quality of life, or businesses that simply want to connect with a curious and engaged audience. I offer opportunities for integrated sponsorships, featured segments, ad reads, standalone sponsorship content, website placement, and social media integration. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, reach out through social media or head on over to theswearword.net. Let's go ahead and get that conversation started. And of course, if you want to go one step further in supporting the podcast, you can always become a Swear citizen. Membership is currently $4.99 a month. That support directly helps me continue investing time, resources, equipment, travel, research, and production into this show. You can also grab official swear word merchandise, join the newsletter, recommend a future guest, and everything else connected to the podcast over at theswearword.net. For our current sponsors, podvision.io, if you're looking to grow your brand, start your brand, you've hit a bump in the road, you're trying to figure things out, highly recommend checking out podvision.io for all of those needs, as well as webdx.one. Maybe you have an online site. Maybe you had a guy at one point and you lost contact with him. Maybe you just never got around to building a website. Highly recommend checking out webdx.one. Best of all, they get you looking great while you get to focus on what you do best. And for everyone who's already supported this podcast, whether you've purchased merch, became a Swear Citizen, shared an episode, left a review, sent me a message, or simply hit play, thank you so much. I do not take that for granted. This podcast exists because of people like you continuing to show up. So keep asking questions, keep reading the labels, keep learning, keep exploring, and of course, keep bringing the heat. I'm Brandon Swear, and from everything from the world of hot, this has been The Swear Word.